Team gives you a closer look at the events that happened around Maine this week.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm Cindy Campbell. Warm weather is here, and that means it's time to think twice before taking your dog along while you're running errands. I chatted this week with Bangor's Animal Control Officer, Tricia Bruen, about some tips pet owners should keep in mind before taking their furry friends along for the ride. So for anyone who doesn't know, Tricia, what does an animal control officer do? What kind of responsibilities do you have?
Oh, wow, that's a loaded question. Well, it could be anything as exciting as investigating animal cruelty complaints and as very unpleasant as, dog feces on the sidewalk complaints. So there's quite a range.
And everything in between.
Right. Barking dogs, dogs running at large, stray cats, injured animals. I do take some wildlife calls. I generally don't handle wildlife, but depending on what it is. So, and then really mundane sorts of things like dog licensing and making sure people stay up to date with their rabies vaccines and stuff like that.
Okay. Today we're going to be talking about pets in cars. I am going to refer to this as dogs in cars, but any pets. I say that because I have a dog, so that's
Right.
what I think of immediately as dogs. At what outdoor temperature, Tricia, should you not leave your pet in the car? Should you leave the pet at home?
Well, obviously, if it's going to be in the 90s, that's should be a no-brainer.
Right.
Don't even bother. There's no point in going to Walmart at noon and bringing your dog with you when it's a nice hot July, August day. With that being said, there are other days when you normally wouldn't think it would be a problem. You leave your house, it's cloudy, but then quickly the temperature can change. The sun can come out. It might only be 78 degrees, but when the sun is really bright, and the inside of your car can heat up very quickly. So even a day when you may not expect it to be too hot or a problem for your animal, it really could be. And there's a lot of other factors like humidity, and if you have a black car with a black leather interior and you don't crack your windows open, your dog is going to be in trouble a lot quicker than someone with a different car. And even breeds of dogs, that is a difference as well.
Yeah, some breeds don't cool off as well as other dogs. They have a harder time self-cooling.
Exactly. Right? Those dogs with the flat faces, we always think of pugs and bulldogs. They have a really hard time. And dogs don't sweat. They're not like people. They can't just sweat out of all their pores like we can. And they can't just take off a coat when they get a little too warm. So, panting and through the little pads in their feet is the best they can do for cooling. And when they're sitting on a hot surface and the air around them is also hot, then the ability to cool down is definitely not there.
Right. I saw a video one time, and I actually tried it for myself just for my own education. If you're not sure whether it's too warm, you go out and sit in a car with the windows cracked like you would leave for a dog for, say, 5 minutes and see how long you last.
Right, exactly. And then, of course, I always get the argumentative folks who will say, oh, look, I'll sit in my car. It's totally fine. And they throw their kid in the back seat, and they'll sit in there. See, we're fine. Well, okay, I see your argument. However, you're sweating, and your dog can't. And again, 5 minutes being able to do it is one thing, but leaving your dog in the car while you do a shopping run for 45 minutes to an hour is very different.
And that's an important point. I think there are some people who say, well, I'm just going to run in for a minute. And how often do we say, I'm just going to run in for a minute, and half an hour later you come out of the store?
Oh, exactly. One thing leads to another, and you bump into someone you know, and then a conversation ensues, and so it's very easy to lose track of time.
Are there good indications if you pass a vehicle and there's a pet, a dog inside the vehicle? Are there good indications that you can look for that maybe the dog is in distress?
Absolutely. Generally people think, oh, the dog is barking, it's distressed. Well, that's actually not really a sign of a dog being too hot. It's probably a sign of a dog being upset because of separation anxiety, and they don't want to be out there alone, and they want their owner to come back. A true sign of a dog actually being distressed, being too hot in the car, is drooling, panting excessively, drool coming out of their mouth. It even starts to get a little frothy as, it gets worse.
Right.
And probably the dog that's really in danger, no one will notice, because those are the dogs that are climbing into the back seat, trying to get under the seat where it's cooler, trying to get out of the sunlight. So the dogs that are really, really in distress are going to be hidden trying to get into the shady, coolest part of the car they possibly can. The larger dogs you'll probably see because they can't fit, and they'll just be sitting there drooling in the back seat.
I see people post things on Facebook all the time that if I passed a car and there was a dog in the car on a sunny day, I'd break the window and get the dog out. Is it legal to do that?
Definitely not.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely not, because you will be liable for replacing that window. And the main problem is, yes, we all love dogs, and no one wants to see a dog hurt, but I think we all know that we all bring our dogs places and leave them in the car, too. The only difference is we know how long we've been out of the car, and we know what we're doing. We don't know the story with the dog that you see in the car at that moment. Maybe they've only been in the store 5 minutes. You have no idea.
Right.
And the problem is, if you start breaking windows, then you're going to find out. The dog's not in distress at all. The dog has a bowl of water in the back seat. The owner ran in the store and has only been in there 5 or 10 minutes. So we receive so many calls, and we go and check on so many dogs, and a very small percentage are actually in distress that I've actually had to remove from the vehicle. With that being said, if we find a dog in a vehicle and we can't reach the owner and it's parked at some place, for example, the movie theater, where I can assume you're not coming out for an hour and a half,
Right.
we're going to have to take the dog out of the car at that point. So that may be one instance where we take a dog out when it's not totally distressed, just because we know you're not going to be out. And that was a very poor decision to make, leaving your dog in a hot car while you're at a movie.
Right.
If someone's parked at, the Irving station, well, I really don't think you're going to be shopping too long at the Irving station.
Right.
So I don't get very concerned about that. It's just the big box stores and, groceries, anything, at the mall, because
Right.
there's no way to know how long people are going to be.
So when in doubt, if you think a dog is in distress, call the police?
Yes, that's always the best thing to do, because if you take matters into your own hands, you're going to be liable for any damage you cause. And, if you see the dog and they're barking or, they're alive and well when you see this dog, you're better off calling us. We can make the determinations that need to be made. We can call and have, a local locksmith come and open up the door if we need to. We can handle it in a way that you won't get in trouble.
Right. Yeah, my husband and I had police called on us one time. We had left our dog in the car for about 10 minutes. And someone pulled up, and it was a warm day, and called the police. And the dog was leaning out the window. Actually, my husband was in the car by the time the police got there. And he walked up, and our dog leaned out the window and licked his hand. And he said, well, this dog is obviously fine. And
Right.
was very nice about it. But at the same time, it's kind of annoying, but at the same time, nice that someone was concerned about the dog. But
Right, and this is what I try to explain to the dog owner, because people aren't calling because they're trying to get you in trouble.
Right,
That's
right.
not the intent. The intent is, oh, I see a dog, I'm concerned, is it going to be hurt? So I try to explain to every, defensive dog owner that, everyone just loves dogs, everyone cares, we're just here to check, and, most of the time, the dogs are fine, and I just let the person know, I'm just taking this information, I'm writing a report, your dog is fine, end of story.
Right.
But there are the few cases when the dogs are not, and then the dogs are taken out, and then there'll be some costs associated with that for the dog owner at that point. But
Right. Okay. So it's a hot day. You've left the dog at home. Kind of think of the same things, right? As far as not leaving the dog outside without shade.
Oh, correct. And the worst case that I've ever had was actually a dog hooked outside on its own front lawn.
Wow.
The dog was just left out there too long, and he was definitely in respiratory distress. I had to just unclip him from his run, throw him in the car, drive him to the e-vet, and they had to cool him down. And he actually survived. His temperature was 107 degrees.
Wow.
Which is that's when you start getting brain damage.
Yeah.
That's very, very dangerous. And once your dog is older in age or a young puppy, they're more susceptible to changes in temperature, and they have a harder time self-regulating. So you have to be even more cautious with really young dogs, really old dogs. And once they've had a couple of instances where they've been left in the car and they've been overheated, and they just become more sensitive as time goes on. So they're at a higher risk going forward. So people really need to be careful with their animals and make sure they do have water and make sure they do have shade. And it's really hard to find that when you're in a car in Bangor trying to shop. There aren't many shady parking spots, as we all know, who have dogs. We've tried.
Yeah, for sure.
And some people leave their car running with AC on, which is great as long as your car doesn't fail. And some cars do have like a timer that's built in that people don't know about. They'll leave their car running with AC on, and then the car shuts off after like 10 or 15 minutes. So make sure you know what your car has for these mechanisms, because that would be a very unfortunate situation to think your dog is perfectly safe and then find out the opposite.
Yeah, and chances are you left the windows up so it would hold the cold air in the car.
And that's even worse.
Yeah.
Yep. And tinted windows, and no one's going to see inside. No one will see your dog. No one will call us. Yeah, it's pretty scary. We've been very fortunate. People are really alert and made phone calls when they've needed to be made, and dogs have been saved. And so hopefully we will continue with our good fortune for this summer as well.
All right. Awesome.
And, yeah, but just, I try to, like, people, think about groceries. I remember being a kid. My mom, we'd go to the grocery store. No, we can't stop. We have to get home or the ice cream will melt. Just think of your dog as a gallon of ice cream.
Right.
I mean, if you wouldn't leave your ice cream in the car because it's too hot, why are you leaving your dog?
Right. Take a bottle of water. I've tried this too. Take a bottle of water, put it in your car, shut your car with the windows down a little bit like you would for the dog. Go back 5 minutes later and try to drink that water on a hot day.
Right.
And you can't, and that's what's happening to your dog, so...
Right. And just because your dog is fine, quote unquote, they're not happy. They are very uncomfortable,
Yeah.
So, I mean, just for that alone, you wouldn't leave your kid locked in the car. You wouldn't leave hopefully your parents locked in the car. Don't leave your dog locked in the car.
Right. And as a dog owner, I know we say this all the time, our dog loves to go for a ride.
Yeah.
Then leave the dog at home, go to the store, go home, and then take your dog out for a ride without stopping anywhere. And the dog, or maybe stop and get them my dog loves Munchkins from Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh, yeah. You got to get the Munchkins. You have to go to the bank. You got to go through the drive-thru, so you get the little dog biscuit there. Right. There are some errands that are great to bring your dogs along with. But, yeah. Definitely not the big grocery shopping or going to the mall.
Right. Okay. One last thing. This is a time of year to protect your pet with rabies and Lyme vaccines, right?
Oh, my word. Yes. And rabies vaccines are required by law, and they are required in order to license your dog, which is also required by law. So definitely stay up to date with your vaccines with your vet. And there are other clinics available if for some reason, I know that a lot of the vets are having a hard time with the COVID restrictions and keeping up with all their clientele that needs services. So, I mean, if you just need a quick rabies shot to stay up to date, there are clinics available for that. But the Lyme vaccine, a lot of people will get that. I actually get that for my dog because she's a black dog, and the ticks are hard to see until they've been on there a while sometimes.
Yeah.
I try, you look, you pat your dog down, but then you'll find one later in her armpit or in the ear. So, for some people, the Lyme vaccine is definitely a wise choice.
Yeah.
And I don't know what's going on, but this year the ticks are a lot more numerous.
They're crazy
than they were
this
last year. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't know where they all came from.
Yeah. Tricia, that's what I had. Is there anything I missed, any point you wanted to bring up that we didn't cover?
People usually want to talk about the pavement. I mean, I think people know. I mean, don't walk your dog on pavement all the time. Let them get off into the cool grass. It's bad for their paws.
Maybe walk in the evenings and in the mornings rather than middle of the day.
Right, in the middle of the day. And, people do go out because that's when they can, but just deviate off, walk in the grass too, not just on the sidewalk or whatever. Yeah, and cracking windows on both sides of the car, not just one, because it's hard to get a cross breeze and ventilation when only one side is open and the wind's on the other side.
One last tip about hot days. Make sure the water you put outside for your pet is in a shaded area so it can remain cool and refreshing. Next, since we're talking about Lyme vaccines for dogs, let's chat a little about ticks. Here's Griffin Dill from the University of Maine Tick Lab. Griffin, how many types of ticks are there in Maine?
So we know of about 15 different species of tick that have been found here.
Wow, I expected you to say like 6. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And what kinds of things can people do to protect themselves against ticks?
Yeah, since managing tick populations is so difficult, it really comes down to a couple of methods of personal protection. And one is creating a barrier in some way. And that barrier can be done through the use of protective clothing like long sleeves, long pants, tucking pant legs into socks or boots. Or the barrier can be a chemical barrier through the use of repellents. There are a number of repellents that are recommended by CDC and EPA based on just how effective they are against ticks. DEET certainly is kind of the most common. And there's another one for use on clothing and gear known as permethrin that seems to be the most effective. The other tool that we really have at our disposal is something relatively simple, and that's simply conducting a tick check once we've come in from the outdoors. It's something that's really common in other parts of the country, but really not part of our culture here in Maine. We haven't really had to deal with ticks for very long, so we really have to make this cultural shift to really get in the habit of looking for ticks and checking ourselves and our pets and our kids closely when they've been outdoors.
Some ticks carry disease, Lyme being the most well-known. Which ticks carry Lyme disease?
So here in the state of Maine, the black-legged tick, or deer tick as it's commonly known, is responsible for transmitting Lyme disease and the other pathogens that do occur here. There are a number of other tick species that can transmit pathogens. Some of them are very host-specific, meaning that they feed on only a certain type of wildlife primarily, and we don't really see them on people. Other tick species that we have here that can transmit disease, the diseases simply haven't been found here yet. So the dog tick is a good example of this. The dog tick is very common in Maine. We see them very frequently biting people and pets, and they can transmit a number of pathogens in other parts of the country. Those pathogens have not yet been found here in the state of Maine. It's something we're certainly monitoring and looking for to see when and if they do occur here, but that species currently is more of a nuisance species than a real public health threat.
Okay. Being bit by a deer tick, does that automatically mean you have Lyme? Do they all carry it, or is it just some?
So not all deer ticks or black-legged ticks carry Lyme disease. They actually have to pick it up from feeding on an infected host, and that goes for several of the other pathogens that are common here in Maine as well. So it's not that all of them are infected. They have to, as I said, feed on infected, mouse or other rodent species, sometimes bird species. So that means not all of them will be infected. As of right now, in the testing that we've been conducting over the past few years, it appears around 40% of deer ticks here in the state of Maine are testing positive for the pathogen that causes Lyme disease. Some of our other pathogens like anaplasmosis and babesiosis that are becoming more common, we're seeing about 6 or 7% of the deer ticks testing positive for those pathogens.
Remember, if you find a tick and want it analyzed, you can send it to the Tick Lab, where they'll identify it free of charge and test it for Lyme for a small fee. Find more information on the website for the University of Maine Tick Lab. I'm Cindy Campbell. Thanks again for joining us, and stay healthy.
Join us again next weekend for Maine Concerns with your Town Square Media News team.